Welcome to Debt Free in 30, where every week we take 30 minutes and talk to industry experts about debt, money, and personal finance. I'm Doug Hoyes. Did you know that the fastest growing age group of people who declare bankruptcy are seniors? It's true. Over the last few years, as the economy has improved slightly, and as the rate of bankruptcy filings in the general population has dropped, only one age group has had a net increase in bankruptcy filings, and that's people over 60 years old. How can that be? Isn't it true that seniors are the richest generation? They benefited from rising real estate values and company pensions, so shouldn't they all be well off? Well, you can't overgeneralize. Some people are better off than others. Some seniors are well off, some are facing many challenges. When my firm, Hoyes Michaelis and Associates, did a study of people who filed a bankruptcy or a consumer proposal with us, we found that the average senior debtor owed almost $70,000 in unsecured debt, which was the second highest among all age groups. Senior debtors' credit card debt was over $37,000, which was the highest credit card debt of all age groups. And that was 57% higher than the average debtor. It's a huge problem. Today, we're going to talk about seniors and aging and debt, and I've got just the expert on the line to help us do that, so let's get started. I'm very pleased to welcome to the show Anne Davies, who may end up being the most educated person we ever have on this show. She has a master's degree from the University of Waterloo, and she also has an MBA and a PhD, as well as many years of experience working in the financial sector as an employee and consultant for insurance, wealth management, banking, and financial education companies. She's also the co-author of a new book called When Life Bites You in the Wallet, Taking Control of Your Finances. It's an excellent book, and I'll put a link to the book in the show notes at hoyes.com if you want to get a copy. Dr. Davies, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much, Doug. I'm doing very well today, and I'm very pleased to be joining you on the show.
So tell me a bit about your PhD. So what exactly is your area of expertise?
Well, what I looked at when I was doing the research for the PhD was changes in health, and I looked at that across 3 Canadian provinces in trying to understand what changes affected people's ability to manage their money. And I looked at that for people aged 55 and over. And of course, the types of things that I'm really interested in are when family structures change. So for example, someone becomes widowed, or when there start to become cognitive problems, because the increase in Alzheimer's and other dementia cases is becoming a big concern for the financial industry as well as many other areas in our lives.
So you're an expert both in money and in seniors and aging. So let's talk about that. In your new book, you talk about seniors and debt, and you quote from our Joe Debtor study where we found that people over the age of 60 now account for 10% of all insolvency filings, and they're the only age group to experience a net increase in total insolvencies. So why is this? What's happening? Why are bankruptcies going up for seniors?
Yeah, your study was really key in a lot of the research that I was doing. Prior to it, I had only looked at American data because the 2008 financial crisis really caused such a big change in the US that we had a lot of information about bankruptcies. Then I had a chance to look at some Canadian data, and yours was key in me really delving deeper into what is going on with older Canadians. The first thing that I found from some of the research, and unfortunately I still have to look at American data for a lot of this, but it does translate well over to Canada. One of the research areas was when looking at financial literacy, how do seniors understand the aspect of debt, and really calling it debt literacy? And what was found from the studies is that people who are older, and this is age 65 and older, they seem to think they know more than they really do know. And that was very pronounced in elderly and women. What it was that there was a lower understanding of interest compounding with elderly people and how credit cards really worked. They also found that elderly ranked themselves higher in terms of financial knowledge. So they had high self-confidence, but they had lower skills. What was unclear in the study was, were the skills lower because they hadn't been exposed to a lot of these products in their younger ages, because credit wasn't as pronounced back when they were younger, or was there actually a cognitive change taking place? And there just wasn't enough information in the study to understand that. But the key takeaway from this study is that somebody who is older is going to be much more vulnerable to making financial mistakes and to being exposed to scams and financial fraud. So a real message to anybody age 65 and over: you need to have extra precautions in place when you're making financial decisions.
So your study wasn't able to figure out exactly why it is that seniors may not have the same level of literacy as other people. Do you have any gut feel on why that is? I mean, you gave a couple of possible explanations. What, do you have a gut feel on why that is? Is it simply that they weren't exposed to credit cards 50 years ago and therefore they didn't grow up with them, or is it something else?
It's definitely related to their lack of exposure or usage of credit products when they're younger. But what I want to do is share with you a few numbers that I think are fascinating and I think start to reveal more of what's happening in Canada. Stats Canada has a terrific survey called the Survey of Financial Security. And it has 3 points of data: 1999, 2005, and 2012. So that gives us a great perspective on what's happening as far as people's consumption and spending patterns go. And I want to look at, in this case, mortgages. And the years that I'm looking at are age 55 to 64 and age 65 and over. So come along with me with these numbers a little bit. I know it's a bit of a pain to follow numbers when you're just listening to them. But somebody who is 65 years and older in 1999 had a mortgage of just over $13,000. Now jump ahead to 2012. That same person who's age 65 years and older now has a mortgage of $46,000. That's about a fair bit of jump there, just about 3.5 point jump. When we look at somebody's total assets who's 65 years and older for that same time period, their assets jumped only by about a 2 percentage point. So we're seeing the debt side going up faster than their asset side. And of course, that'll affect your overall net worth. So what's going on here? Why do we have people who are older having mortgages that are larger than they used to be? My biggest fear in all of this is that it's not necessarily that somebody older is going out and buying a more expensive house and having to take a mortgage. My biggest fear is that they are co-signing for their children or their grandchildren. And this is where we get into the idea of debt literacy and understanding the implications of co-signing for somebody. I really get when somebody wants to help a family member. We all want to make sure that people don't have to struggle maybe as hard as we had to in years past. And everybody has specific cultures in their family and values and so forth. I get that people want to help the younger generation. But if you're going to do that, please do not co-sign for somebody who's younger. You can gift to them. A financial gift can be a great option because it doesn't tie you to them legally, contractually through that co-signing. When I see this type of mortgage increase for an older person, I am very concerned that they have now become contractually linked to that younger generation by co-signing for them, helping them buy that first house. And we know with the chances of marriage breakdown or other problems rising, that older person is going to be accountable for that financial issue. And this point in their life, when they don't have many options for income stream, they could find themselves in severe financial problem. And I think that's part of the reason why you're seeing this senior debtor start to grow as your largest growth area in your business.
So it's not that they are naive, it's that they are trying to help people. A lot of the problems comes from co-signing for their adult children who perhaps, have job issues, marital breakdown issues, whatever. They're trying to help them out, but in so doing, what they're really doing is taking on a whole lot of debt for themselves.
That's one side of it, definitely, that they're trying to help out. I'm going to take it on to the other side now. What we're also seeing in the younger generation is a sense of entitlement that they can go ahead and ask their parents to help and expect that they're going to get a yes from that. We didn't see that in prior generations. There wasn't a sense that you just turned to your parents as the bank of mom and dad, and they would help you basically reach a standard of living that the parents have. Kids expected to start lower and move their way up. Instead, with this sense of entitlement, they're turning to their parents and saying, hey, I want this great house. I want to put my kids in private school, or I want to put my kids in these activities. And you know what? I actually can't do this financially, but you can help me out because you're actually not using that money. And so we start to get this erosion of the seniors' money, their financial status, because the younger generation is putting pressure on them. And that's a slippery slope, and people need to be more aware of how these types of dynamics take place in a family, because it's putting that older generation at risk. And again, back to the point, at a time when they cannot afford to take on that risk.
Wow, so we got problems at both ends of the age spectrum. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Debt Free in 30. My guest is Dr. Anne Davies. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Debt Free in 30, where every week we take 30 minutes and talk to industry experts about debt, money, and personal finance. Today, my guest is Dr. Anne Davies, who has a new book out called When Life Bites You in the Wallet, Taking Control of Your Finances. In Chapter 26, you talked about bag lady fears. So I found that phrase very interesting. What exactly does that mean? Explain that to us, please.
Hi, Doug. Yeah, bag lady fears is something that's top of mind with me because I encounter it so often in conversations with women, almost any place where I go. Generally, the whole bag lady perspective is a stereotype. We think of the crazy lady or the crazy cat lady or so forth. It's driven by someone with a mental illness, and they're at risk of poverty. The reality today is that the bag lady syndrome is something that's affecting even high net worth women. And I want to give you an example of a survey that was done by Alliance Life Insurance in 2013. Almost 50% of US women fear being poor. I'll take that a step further. Women in the US with incomes over $200,000, 27% of them fear being poor. So what is going on here? Well, basically, with bag lady syndrome, what we have is women recognizing that their life expectancy means that they're likely going to end up living alone because they're living longer, and they're at risk of isolation. So in Canada, if we look at the life expectancy of male versus female at birth, it's 79 for male, 83 for female. If we look at life expectancy when you're at age 65, a male, it's 83. A female, it's just over, or almost 87. Now I'm going to adjust life expectancy for health. And what that means is how long you are healthy before you start to become dependent on needing some sort of assistance or levels of medication. Now here's the big one. For males in Canada, it's age 70. For females, it's age 71. Notice how they almost are identical. What that means is that we're going to have women living longer, but they're also not going to be as healthy. And that makes them vulnerable. So that also adds to the concerns about becoming a bag lady, because you're going to need more help. So you're going to live longer, and you're likely going to be experiencing some level of illness. Now, the next problem that we're running into with this bag lady syndrome, and why are we getting these women who have money being concerned about being poor? Well, they grew up with mothers and grandmothers who were economically dependent. And I think, and this is just my theory, there's no research to prove this, but I think that role models have such an influence on the way we perceive ourselves that the generation of women who are in their 50s and 60s now still have that sense that they could become economically dependent themselves. It increases their vulnerability. I believe that the next generation, so basically our daughters, are not going to have that same sense, that same feeling of the bag lady syndrome to some degree. And I'm going to put a little proviso in this one. I am very concerned when I see young women not really taking control of their finances, and we're still seeing that issue. Women need to understand money at all ages. So I have great hope that the next generation won't have the bag lady syndrome fears, but I do have a little bit of concern that they're still not stepping up to the plate on that one. The other thing, the fourth aspect of bag lady syndrome, is anecdotally what I continually get as feedback from the women I speak to is that their spouses or their brothers or whoever's the key male in their family who's looking after some financial matter will turn to them and say, "Don't worry, I've got it under control." When you hear that sentence, you need to stop and say, "Look, I'm so pleased that you've got it under control. I really appreciate the effort that you're taking, but I need to understand it too. I need to understand it should anything ever happen to you, and I need to step in, but I need to understand it for my own peace of mind." Never let somebody look after something that is your own responsibility. Do not abdicate the responsibility for your finances. If we can get people thinking about their finances, understanding it, becoming more financially literate, I believe that bag lady syndrome will start to dissipate.
So you're saying it's a real fear. It's not an irrational fear. The health concerns, income concerns, and so on. But the solution ultimately, if I am a female who is worried about that, is literally to take control of my own finances, to understand what's going on. That's the practical takeaway message?
Absolutely it is, because you can't change some of the realities of our life expectancy, of our vulnerability to illness, and so forth, but you can sure take control of your finances.
Excellent. Well, that's very practical advice. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much for joining me today, Dr. Davies. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30 with Doug Hoyes. We'll be right back. You're listening to Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
This is Debt Free in 30. I'm Doug Hoyes, and it's time for the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. My guest was Dr. Anne Davies, and we talked about how seniors have the highest level of credit card debt of any age group that goes bankrupt. That's scary. We also talked about bag lady syndrome, the fear that as you grow older, you'll be left with limited financial resources. Half of women worry about being poor, and even a quarter of high net worth women, that's women with a family income of $200,000 or more a year, also fear being poor as they get older. Dr. Davies is very concerned that we don't understand money as well as we think we do, and it's our responsibility to take responsibility for our financial future. That's the 30-second recap of today's Debt Free in 30 show. So, what's my take on all this? Well, there's no doubt that those numbers are startling. At age 65, the average life expectancy is 83 for men as compared to 87 for women. So women have a longer life expectancy than men, which means mathematically they are more likely to spend a portion of their later years alone. And that can really strain the finances if you lose one of your family's incomes. If your spouse has a pension, has other income, and is no longer there, your family income is likely to drop. That's a problem if you're going to outlive your spouse. The other problem is that as we get older, we have increasing medical expenses. Our health begins to decline. So not only does your income potentially decline as you get older, but you could have higher medical expenses for prescriptions or other things to deal with medical conditions. It's a double whammy. That's why it's critically important that you've got a handle on your finances as you get older. I thought it was interesting that Leanne said one of the things that worries her is when she hears a woman tell her that, well, my spouse said, hey, don't worry, I've got all the finances under control. You don't have to worry about it. Dr. Davies' comment to that was, well, your response should be, hey, that's great that you're looking out for me, but I need to understand it as well. And I fully agree. Over the years, I have counseled lots and lots of people who have lost a spouse and they are left adrift. They have no idea what's happening with their money. In some cases, they can't even get into the bank account because they don't know the password for their web banking. They don't know where the investments are, where the RSPs are. They don't know where the insurance documents are. They don't know where the mortgage documents are. It's a serious problem. You've got to know how everything works because someday you may be the person looking after it. Never let someone else look after something that's your responsibility. Doesn't mean you have to take over everything, but you should know how everything works. That's the message from today's show. That is it for our show today. I want to thank Dr. Anne Davies for joining me today to talk about debt and seniors. I fully agree with her statement that it's up to each of us to take responsibility for our financial well-being. And I think becoming educated about your money is the first step. That's why we do this show. If you're listening to this on the radio, thanks for listening. Please make a note of the station and time this show is on so you can tune in again next week. If you're listening to this in podcast format, fantastic. Please subscribe on iTunes or whatever other podcast service you use so you can get the show every week. For information on today's show, you can go to hoys.com to see the show notes, and we encourage you to leave your comments right there on the website. Or to get the show notes for any of our shows, you can go to hoys.com, that's HOYES.com, click on the blog, go to the podcast link, just search for the word podcast. You can read our show notes, get links to everything we discussed, and you can even listen to the show again on your computer. That's hoys.com, HOYES.com for full show notes. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoys. This was Debt Free in 30.
Thanks for listening. This was Debt Free in 30.